All right, we got great news. We got the Hormuz Strait opening, but from what I've heard, it was instantly closed. So this is going to be a very interesting watch to see exactly how the Republican Party, after essentially doing a genocide on Iran, is going to try and sell you the idea that they're in control, mainly economically.
More now with CNN global affairs analyst and Iran expert Kareem Sajapur. Also with us, the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, retired U.S. Army General Wesley Clark. To both of you, thanks very much for joining us. And Kareem, let me start with you on this major news from the Iranians announcing that the Strait of Hormuz is, in their words, completely open. It's been a source of leverage for Iran for some time now. What do you think? Does this suggest a peace deal, a real peace deal, could be imminent?
Uh, Wolf, President Trump obviously wants to try to end this 47-year conflict with Iran in several weeks. But in my view, that's not going to happen. You still have the same regime which wants the United States as an adversary. A more narrow agreement on just the nuclear issue is possible, but there's no signs that Iran is prepared to change its conduct. And on the Strait of Hormuz, what they found is that that's an incredible tool of leverage for them. They agreed to open it now in exchange for Israel ceasing its military operations in Lebanon. But in the future, if Israel resumes its military operations in Lebanon, they may well try to stop traffic in the Strait again.
Well, what's going to happen if Hezbollah in Lebanon starts firing rockets and missiles towards northern Israel, which they've been doing?
There are so many saboteurs in this equation, not only Lebanese Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, Shiite militias in Iraq, and individuals within the Iranian Revolutionary Guards who actually want to prolong the war for their own internal expediency.
All right, stand by. I want to bring in General Clark. General Clark, in announcing the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, the Iranian foreign minister said vessels must still transit through what they called a coordinated route laid out by Iranian authorities. Is it unusual at all that Iran would be determining this?
Well, it's absolutely unusual, it's unprecedented, and it's illegal. And so this is an international waterway. They have no right to do this, but there still may be mines out there, and those mines have to be cleared. Someone has to certify that the mines are cleared. But Wolf, in addition to that, as Kareem was saying, this situation will never go back to what it was before because what's happened is Iran has exercised a weapon, and that weapon is still there. It's still like an axe hanging over international commerce and diplomacy in the region. And they've seen how powerful it is. And I think we also have to look at the role of China in this. When Pakistan's coming in and helping to broker this and convincing China is behind Pakistan. The Saudis are working with Pakistan. It's a temporary fix. Yes, it should be open. It should be open for China because they're the biggest beneficiary of it, and the Iranians know it, and they can't keep it closed. But there's been a real demonstration of strategic power here by the Iranian regime. So I just second what Kareem has to say. Lots of saboteurs out there, lots of potential pitfalls in the future.
Certainly are. Kareem, the U.S. Navy currently has a blockade that went into effect a few days ago on Iran in the Strait that President Trump says will remain in full force, but only as it pertains to Iran, his words, only as it pertains to Iran. How does this impact the country?
So Iran is a country under dire economic straits. Even before this war, it was probably the most sanctioned country in the world. Now it's endured probably tens, if not over $100 billion in damages as a result of this war.
Okay, the fact that a lot of these people essentially committed a genocide, and the only reason they're trying to get this the Strait open is not because of the strikes on Iran, because they can clearly sustain it. They're trying to withdraw from Lebanon because Lebanon's going to become the new Palestine where they level it out and just completely decimate it. And so they know with the Western imperialists, a lot of them always focus on the economy first. The economy, of course, is going to be the main priority, so they can open it up for the white liberals and the white Democrats, as well as the white Republicans and the white conservatives who are evangelical, because they will now see this as a sign of God that they approve the strikes because all they care about is the gas prices. And the only discussion that they've been having in America is not just end the war, but lower my gas prices and my groceries, which are affected by the energy sectors that are being dominated by AI and their structures of their databases. So a majority of these people don't really realize that the entire indoctrination that they have, that ending the war is mainly due to the fact of humanity and human life, is completely negated by the fact that you can end the huge portion of the fighting purely by alleviating financial gain and financial hardships in the concept of that war, which means the war is not a holy war. It's rather just a financial monetary war, which is why it's just there for money and they used money to pause it. This is why wars are not only fought on logistics, they're fought on the conceptualization that you're only going to war for people's money. It means they're not there for vengeance or justice, but rather they are there for more income for their people's like, prosperity. So it's just robbery and imperialist conquest.
And that's one of the reasons why there are folks within the government who don't mind prolonging the war, because once there is a longer term ceasefire, they will face an incredibly aggrieved population.
No doubt about that. General Clark, we're about a day into that 10-day proposed truce between Israel and Lebanon. Hours after it started, though, the Lebanese army accused Israel of violating the ceasefire. The conflict in Lebanon has been a key sticking point in all the negotiations between the U.S. and Iran. Is Israel playing into Iran's hands here if, in fact, it's violating the ceasefire?
Yeah, of course it is. But Iran has never had Hezbollah come back and acknowledge the ceasefire. So Hezbollah is a third party left out. At any time, Hezbollah could launch a couple of rockets, and you can't take away Israel's right to defend itself. Israel has that right, and I know that there are many in Israel today who are perplexed by this. We we're going to get an agreement with Lebanon, and what about Hezbollah? We were going to get rid of Hezbollah. They're still there. What restrictions will emerge on Iran's support of Hezbollah as we try to wrap this up with a complex, complete diplomatic agreement? And if there are no such restrictions, we're still in the danger zone, Wolf.
No doubt about that. The danger zone continues. General Clark, thank you very much. Kareem Sajapur, thank you to you as well.
Well, oil prices are trading at their lowest level in 5 weeks following the earlier announcement by the Iranian foreign minister. Let's discuss with Richard Quest, CNN business editor at large and anchor of Quest Means Business. So, Richard, we're seeing this significant drop in prices. But as they say in the real world, what's changed?
Oh, I think quite a lot has changed. The sentiment has changed. If you look at the developments over the course of the day, there is a view that there is more of a willingness to move forward towards peace. Now, I get the point that you're making. What's changed factually, of course? Nothing. And that's why, although I say the willingness and the trend and the mood has changed, this fall that we're looking at the screen is entirely justifiable and predictable, and it is equally reversible if the trend does not continue, if the mood movement doesn't change, if, for example, the blockade remains and no oil flows out. That's the reality here. It's going to be a case of wait and see if the ships actually move. Talk all you like. We want to see the ships.
We want to see the ships, and you have...
By the way, all these ships are prevented from moving with tons of mines and explosives. So it sounds pretty cool that let you through, but realistically, if you ignore their demands, it's not like a strike of a bunch of like drones or systems hitting you. It's just more so an ideology of just having tons of people just come in and just get blown up by the ocean. It looks like it's like the hands of God is really just protecting that place, because as soon as you try to clear it out, they're gonna have clear shots on any minesweepers or any systems there. And you literally could just fill it up with currents and put them in positions where the current just swims it there and blows it up. You have all sorts of mines. Mines that stand still, mines that swim, mines that are just mobile, like drones underwater, like submarines with explosives on it. A lot of these people could be baiting you into an ambush. And because, again, a lot of these people in this warfare is essentially pushing the identity that they don't care what happens, because they know this is just a monetary war, that everyone just wants money and resource and all these ideas that they know better than the people who've lived there for so long. They know that cutting off resources or cutting off the ideology that they have of making as much money from the oil fields is just more purely beneficial for all of them. This dynamic that they think that Trump can really get to them or get to their head is ridiculous. He cannot get to any of these people. He doesn't understand their culture. He doesn't understand their war fighting tactics. He doesn't understand where they come from and why they do what they do. He just sees this as a brute force. I am bigger than you. I'm stronger. Obey me. That does not work with men who have lived in environments that were brutal, but not ones that they submit in. They always fight back. This is a very dangerous situation because, again, they know they control one of the most vital points of the economy, because a lot of that oil affects some of the trade allies, how it affects their food, how it affects their resource, how it starts to inflate some food items, how it starts to inflate their allies as well, because the allies will turn against them because they're only thinking about the American conquest, and they think they can pivot the European allies the same way that Iran's pivoting them. Is this, oh, if you want cheaper oil, you got to help kill these guys. It's not going to work, because if it doesn't even work on the Europeans, what makes you think that's going to work on the Iranians? They misunderstand this entire dynamic of who they're supposed to support and who they're actually siding with, because they sided with oil companies and not with the American people.
Maersk, one of the largest shipping companies, saying that they've noticed Iran's announcement on the Strait of Hormuz, and then they go on to say the safety of our crew, vessels, and customers' cargo remains our top priority. That doesn't signal that they are ready to set sail, all things being back to normal.
No, and they won't be. And they, however many ships they've got caught in the upper Gulf, they will remain there. But let's just say the Iranians start to give exactly those guarantees. No, you can go forward, no toll. Let's just say, I'm speculating, you can go forward. But you've still got the Americans in the Arabian Gulf outside. You've still got them waiting with their blockade to move things forward. So, and the price that you're looking at now is predicated on actual real oil ships moving. If they don't, that price will go back up again. As for the longer term, how much of the economic crisis is baked in? Is the cake actually rising now? Inflation, how much damage has been done? We don't really know. It'll be a few more weeks before we can quantify that. Certainly an element of damage, but the better news is that things are looking better. Now they've got to actually prove it.
Yeah, and it's pretty clear that the president is wanting this war to come to an end rather quickly as well. He sees all of these economic numbers. CNN's, thank you so much. Really appreciate Richard Quest. Thank you for joining us.
What are we hearing from the president on all of this? He's on quite a spree on True Social this morning on these big developments, Betsy.
Yes, Pamela, President Trump and his team are watching this very closely, receiving regular updates from here in Las Vegas, where the president is making an economic push. But news that the Strait of Hormuz is reopening, very welcome, and officials are feeling optimistic as these talks are progressing in real time. President Trump reacting in that flurry of social media posts. And now we are learning, according to reporting from our colleagues Elena Treen and Kevin Liptak, that the Trump administration is also considering freezing $20 billion in Iranian assets as part of these negotiations. I want to read to you from a post the president sent just a few moments ago. He says, quote, "The USA will get all nuclear dust created by our great B-2 bombers. No money will exchange hands in any way, shape, or form." Of course, this idea of Iran potentially benefiting financially from this deal, even if no money is exchanged, could lead to some criticism of President Trump, who has been critical of similar deals under the Obama administration. But officials are hoping that a broader deal to end this conflict could be finalized as soon as this weekend. And they are watching those talks between Iranian and Pakistani officials very, very closely to see that if a potential second round of talks could take place in Islamabad as soon as this weekend. Now, there are still some major sticking points, and that includes how long Iran has agreed to pause its uranium enrichment, as well as retrieval of Iran's nuclear material. That is what President Trump is referring to as nuclear dust. But all of this comes after the president yesterday announced a 10-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, something that sources say really paved the way for these quickly progressing developments, as well as this announcement that the Strait of Hormuz is reopening. President Trump has said that the Strait blockade will remain in full force until that deal is completed. complete. But we are already seeing oil prices go down, the stock market going up due to this news. It comes as the president is here trying to make that economic pitch, and people I've talked to are already feeling the crunch from this conflict. Pamela and Wolf.
All right, Betsy Klein, thanks for the latest.
It's wild how you can spend literally weeks talking about how this war is inhumane and disgusting and it kills people en masse and everyone's suffering from it. There's people that could potentially starve to death on the other side of the world. And their only thing is like, yeah, but like mile per gallon though, right? Like, are we talking real business here, or we're still complaining about the same people in the Middle East, like the same people, you know? Why they're still dying? There's still some left. I thought you guys already genocided them. I thought they're all dead. You know what I mean? Like a lot of these liberals and Republicans just genuinely don't care. They really want to care about their mile per gallon. They're mad that like their eggs cost a little more because they gotta put like that heat gun on it or something so it stays warm, and they're pissed that like the greenery or the shrubs they're growing are like costing more electricity wise. Their Tesla per gallon or per watt or something went up. They're like confused why that was affected too, and they forget that energy is also affecting the energy generators and energy prices going up too, because you're fueling your car with electricity, but behind that, if you follow it all the way up to its wired position, you have like a diesel engine and like charcoal engines going. So a lot of these people just really forget that this entire economy is oil based and we have no real green solution yet. We're just really hoping a bunch of nerds get on it one day and figure it out better. But this concept as a whole is just really one of the most tragic, I believe, because it shows not only the humanity issue in America where it's exploitative naturally, but the average American does not care unless this has something to do with their day-to-day life. And realistically, if this empire got away to censor social media while enacting a genocide, we would only notice when the prices of our food or our gas goes up, not when there's an complete extermination of an entire race of people. Wild to think about how this modern age has made people very cold and empty inside of their hearts.
$20 billion for nuclear material has been floated, not decided. Nick referenced to reporting. And I will quote from it. One proposal includes unfreezing assets in exchange for Iran turning over its stockpile of highly enriched uranium. Iran has asked for major sanctions relief, unfreezing of assets north of the 20 billion figure. The sources said the discussions are ongoing, haven't been resolved. This is like the crux of everything. Like Strait is the linchpin, I think, from an economic perspective. But this is the crux of the deal that every president has been going after for decades and decades. What's your latest sense of things?
Yeah, I mean, those are the two biggest sticking points, I think, throughout these entire negotiations. And as you mentioned, the Strait, one of them. But I think for now, seems more likely to be resolved. It's this idea of how long will Iran actually commit to suspending their enrichment of uranium, and then also the idea of going in to retrieve the enriched, having the U.S. or perhaps another country, some sort of mediator going in to retrieve the uranium that they already have.
And he just put out a flurry of social media posts this morning announcing the U.S. would acquire all of Iran's, quote, nuclear dust.
Yeah.
And that money would not be exchanged in negotiations for that nuclear dust, as he calls it, from the B-2 bombers. But two sources are telling CNN this morning the administration is considering unfreezing $20 billion in Iranian assets as part of the negotiations. Really quick, I want to play what the president said earlier about the Obama administration's Iran deal.
And then, very importantly, I terminated Barack Hussein Obama's Iran nuclear deal, a disaster. Obama gave them $1.7 billion in cash, green cash. Took it out of banks from Virginia, D.C., and Maryland, all the cash they had. He flew it by airplanes in an attempt to buy their respect and loyalty, but it didn't work.
Is it a good idea for the U.S. to consider releasing these funds to Iran? What do you think?
Well, we obviously were very critical.
Okay, first of all, he called him Hussein because he wants to call him just a brown guy from the Middle East. Second of all, taking that cash out was because they knew Republicans would seize any bank assets or any accounts like that, so any longevity of the deal they made would disappear as soon as a Republican administration went in. And then third of all, the reason they did that is because the Republicans hate a bunch of brown people in another country actually establishing peace through money and deals that actually matter through trade. So essentially what happened was you have like a permanent loyalty with the Democrat Party with them, but you have no loyalty with the Republican Party because they're just just trying to murder and establish complete dominance through Darwinism. So when you're reaching a point where they don't know how to make a deal with Iran, they're gonna have to eventually capitulate to the Democrat Party in order to stop World War III and stop any sort of Middle Eastern complete chaos from devolving into just warfare everywhere on every front and total war just breaking out. So it looks like it's just like a complete breakdown of what we always do in the Middle East, which is you send the Republican in to go hard, shock and awe, kill tons of people, and then the anti-war party comes in, starts pulling them back, starts saying be more human, start being more of a dignified person, more disciplined. They add more policy and regulation, and then eventually they see the weakness and they attack you too much. That gets a Republican elected. The Republican goes in and goes killing more and more. And you have this back and forth between the right wing and the left wing and an established ideology of what it means to enact warfare overseas with a group of people that realistically, if they both went all in on, they could convince the public in propaganda to just hate them unconditionally through just purely media talks and pure just discussions on why these people are devolved, disgusting people. And then they just go back and forth. It's a very intriguing system that essentially is built to last in long-term warfare. It's not one that's meant to actually stop death and destruction, but rather to gain way more dominance and control over resources, which is why the entire system as a whole is essentially a monopolized system of both the liberal leftist mindset of the socialists mixed in with the right-wing imperialist capitalist conservative, which is just establishing pure greed. I'm strong enough to take it, so I'll take it. And when they go too far, they just hit the gas, hit the brakes, and then when they hit the brakes, they're drifting along the edges, like kind of like when the destroyer ship was shot at by some cruise missiles to make them drift, and then a couple planes fell off. They might take a couple losses in funding, a couple losses in support, but realistically, if you own both sides of the party through corporatism and just pure fundraising and donations, the people's voice is really dictated by what's on the news and what's propagandized online. So realistically speaking, this entire war is enacted by the United States of America for a bunch more oil profits and a bunch more of the perspectives as being seen as the most civil, elite people on the planet. Because at the end of the day, their best perception of seeing them as human comes from the Democrat Party, which just gave them cash to essentially one day probably become a nuclear power. But at least they're able to monitor it in the process and be able to see how far they're along, which could be around like 70-80% of their nuclear enrichment could be there. You would probably see that within a couple years, within a tangible amount of time, you'll be able to understand exactly what is happening and what's not happening over there.
Critical of the way President Obama handled giving cash to Iran. I think it really depends on the negotiation that President Trump comes through with them. What are we getting in exchange? What are the security measurements that we're going to receive, and have the assurances that they're not going to pursue any sort of nuclear capability? President Trump is a tough negotiator. I mean, we've been really able to watch him negotiate almost as a general public through the Truth Social post. And there's days you're like, wow. But this is the way he negotiates. He's a tough negotiator, and he gets results.
Including threatening taking out an entire civilization.
Well, and you know what? That was one of the things that they, as he said, they say death to Israel, death to America. And I think we have to take them seriously, and while they are a much smaller country and they don't have the capabilities that we do as Americans, we still have to take it seriously. And I think that those were the types of words that they understood what those meant. I believe that he never intended to do that, but it was simply the rhetoric to put them in a position of he means business.
The bottom line is the U.S. has long pointed to Iran as being a state sponsor of terrorism, going back 47 years. And Trump, for his part, said that this war was initiated to prevent Iran from funding that, right? Yeah. So if the U.S. does ultimately unfreeze these assets for Iran as part of these negotiations and move the blockade away so the oil ports are open, does that essentially allow it to continue to be a state sponsor of terrorism?
Well, I hope not. I mean, I was born in 1976, and as long as I can remember, Iran has been a state sponsor of terrorism. I mean, they have killed thousands of Americans. They continue to fund these proxies in the Middle East, causing disruptions, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah or the Houthis, and of course, all of the instability in Syria and Iraq. Iran's always behind it. And that's why I really, truly believe that President Trump knows this is the moment that there has to be a change in ideology in the government in Iran. And, that's going to take some time here, but I think the hardest part of the work is done. And now it's going to be a lot of diplomacy and also pressure where the pressure needs to be put in place to push them that direction.
Plus, the Strait of Hormuz is declared open by Iran while a Lebanon-Israel ceasefire holds. Britain and France have welcomed the announcement, but warned that more needs to be done.
We welcome the announcement that was made during our meeting, but we need to make sure that that is both lasting and a workable proposal. And if anything, it reinforces the need for the work that we've been doing this afternoon, because we're very clear that the mission that we're putting together is a defensive mission and that comes after a ceasefire.
The announcement broke as British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron co-hosted dozens of world leaders on the situation in the Strait of Hormuz. CNN's Melissa Bell is outside the Élysée Palace in Paris for more. And Melissa, I'm serious when I ask this question. What is the point of this meeting for European officials when they don't have a stake in any of the decision making here, as has been seen given the announcement from President Trump of potentially a deal looming, and also that the Strait, as for now, is open?
This was a meeting that was initially proposed by the British and the French, but that also attracted in presence. They were actually here in Paris, the Italian leader and the German leader. But there were some 50 participants in it, many remotely. They were global organizations, but some 30 heads of state or government. And that's important because it wasn't just Europeans. What we're talking about are the leaders from Latin America through the Middle East to the Indo-Pacific, those parts of the world that were not belligerent in this case, that are not directly involved in the war, but have been on the front line of its effects, of its impacts. And so they came together to try and put together, and they've been talking about this for some weeks, this coalition to ensure that navigation can stay open in the Strait of Hormuz. The idea is that they want no blockade, they want no tolls, and they want the end of fighting, a ceasefire allowing them to mount this mission with the help of the ships of France, the United Kingdom, Germany, and Italy in order to carry out minesweeping operations. Now, crucially,
You notice that a lot of the ideologies that they have is this concept that it's the third world being mainly affected. It's like any war that actually enacts itself and starts to fight always only affects the poorest people of the planet, so that it coincidentally does not get into the majority white nation's head that they're hurting real people, because they're playing off the fact that these cultures are different and easier to manipulate and have to submit just purely off logistics and cultural differences. So they're pretty much going up for grabs for trade deals, going to strike certain areas for the resources and the political gains. And they're going to establish a bunch of neoliberalism where they just go in and take as much as they can through businesses, take it back while they're at their weakest moment. And when they're strong enough to be dependent on themselves, they're going to have no lesser income because they had to survive the hard times that came before. So they're essentially just going to rob the third world dry again, just using the energy sectors, which these energy sectors always end up defecting to like the Eastern imperialists or the Eastern authoritarians, because their entire indoctrination is just to buy guns and resources from them, because everyone on the West is doing the same thing anyway, and they have a chance to defend themselves and establish their borders and from any invasion, or from the idea of confiscating businesses or confiscating rights or resources that were taken during their most desperate times. Which is interesting because I see this as a moment of weakness from a lot of these first world countries, where they show what they're actually intending to do, which of course a lot of the third world already knows. However, the first world is starting to pick up the game on what they're trying to do. They've done it enough times to the Middle East, and they're starting to reenact it down in Latin America with Cuba and Venezuela, and they're starting to establish pretty much Cuba as Puerto Rico. Then their entire ideology is just them trying to say that they know what they're doing better with their resources than anyone else does. Which is why it's just like this big takeover of all these third world countries, where they're just going to put it under their control to make it a resort or like some vacation place, while they simultaneously tell them their kind don't belong and then kick them out through gentrification, essentially a soft core genocide where it's not going to be a hardcore where you're seeing strikes and bombs and forcing them out like Israelis, but instead rather it's going to be more of a pricing out genocide, which is happening in America through gentrification and mass homelessness and the establishment of having jobs for only certain types of people and not the black or brown, which is leading to mass homelessness, which now validates the narrative that we're all like bums and don't know what we're doing and don't know how to establish ourselves as a survivor in a capitalist society, and therefore not fit for it, and therefore should go somewhere else and migrate. It's a mass migration, and essentially they're pushing people out in accordance to a hegemony as well as a violent monopoly and colonial empire outside of the borders, and establishing, once they grab control, a more non-violent, which they starve people out and push people into complete poverty.
only once a ceasefire has been struck. Then this announcement of the lifting on the Iranian side of the blockade and all the hope that it has brought. But what the French president wanted to keep front and center was the need for prudence, because we'd seen so many times before, at moments of a glimmer of hope, disappointment then. Faced with the maximalist demands of the United States, the intransigence of the Iranians, and the continued frustration of the rest of the world faced with this, the idea here was to try and do something about it without those involved directly in the war. This is what the French president had to say.
We demand a total reopening immediately, unconditionally, by all parties of the Strait of Hormuz. We demand a restoration of the conditions of free navigation that were in place before the war.
So they're feeling prudent about the prospects of peace, because, of course, the complexity of the negotiations ahead leaves no doubt to leaders who gathered here in Europe, in Paris today. But they are also simply actually looking for a return to the situation before this war began. Bianna.
All right. Melissa Bell in Paris for us. Thank you.
Now, I will say, from all of the conversations I've been having today with Trump administration officials, White House officials, they are very optimistic that a deal could potentially be finalized as early as this weekend. What I'm told is that really what we are watching play out, Nick was describing it in Tehran with the Pakistanis, mainly the Field Marshal, Asim Munir, who has been really the lead person talking with top Trump administration officials and the Iranians. How that goes today, if they can successfully get the Iranians to agree to a certain number of things that we know they are really pushing for, these are two of the biggest ones, then they believe they could get there. Now, of course, we've heard these discussions of potential second round of talks. I think actually at this point what the Trump administration is hoping for, again, this is all, best case scenario, I should say. This is not something that is a done deal. But they're hoping that actually if they, these top officials, Witkoff, Kushner, perhaps J.D. Vance, go to Pakistan, that it would be more of a formality, that it would be signing a potential document, finalizing a couple last-minute things, but that really the big discussions are happening in Tehran today. And what's also been so fascinating to me, it's almost frustrating because I am trying to report this out, seeing the president posting repeatedly nonstop, 11-plus truths today. I'm told that's really, he has been getting constant updates from the Pakistanis who are in Tehran, and then he's posting about on True Social. The thing I would tell our viewers and remind them is that this is his interpretation of it, and this is one side of the agreement. The Iranians obviously have a different one, and so there are still, gaps that need to be closed, but they are in a much more confident position than they have been in recent days.
Okay, I want to look at this picture again. These are all the ships that are blockaded in the Hormuz. This tiny little crevice controls an artery of oil in our nation. Because this nation in America, though we ourselves still have plentiful, we are not given any by the many that need it. They are given by the select few. So a lot of these people are in third worlds, sure, but a lot of them are resorting to extreme measures, maybe even defecting in their trade deals to other nations so they can establish themselves as that more supported entity. The only benefit we have in this nation is that we can maintain profits for the rich and the oil companies and not actually a sustainable life for the poor, because as soon as these prices go up, they're pretending that they're dropping. So it's interesting, right? Because Trump has this made up concept in his head that oil and gas in America is like extremely affordable and cheap. It's like everywhere he drives, there's a circle around him, and the oil companies all drop the prices to like $2, $3. So he never knows the actual price of oil or gasoline as a whole. He just looks around and it's like this fantasy land of the richest people in the world controlling his perspective on what life is about. And they can do this to the poor in the opposite direction, where they make them poorer and poorer and exploit them. And this is just marketing and trends in accordance to an AI module, which is taught to extort as much money as possible from people. You can't take this administration serious when they're that easy to fool. A lot of them are liars for professional means. They take accreditation from business, and of course in business they teach you to lie in this marketing and sales, and you pretty much demand them to like everything you do because they like tricking people, they like hurting people, they like raping and killing. He's a convicted rapist. He's again a terrible human being who's accused of the worst crimes humanity's ever seen, and they're establishing themselves as like this dominant ideology that should always be obeyed no matter what. And then they have the audacity to say they have morality, and they're making fun of the Pope. They're like shit posting the Pope on Twitter, and they think they're actually like an intellectual being that's worthy of respect when they've just extorted the American people, the third world, and a bunch of Middle Easterns, and they think that deal is gonna sustain itself and not just prove itself to be the purest form of a complete domination of Darwin, and therefore through Darwinistic principles of the strongest will survive and therefore the strong will be the one that never dies, is just a concept that they're just constantly going to bring warfare to anyone that tries to dare question their authority. I believe this isn't going to end well because if we were scared of one single Osama bin Laden, and that was over a similar situation, Palestine, Israel, the concepts of the Middle East being imperialized, then I think they're going to be worried a lot more about the, I don't know, couple thousand Osamas and maybe a couple thousand more Alis coming out or Haidars. So I believe this is a fumble. I believe that businessmen in America feel like they're untouchable and they just made the best profits ever in an artificial rug pull of just imperialism. But this will backfire probably again on the Democrat administration or any other really at this point. It's going to be a long-term war since they always blamed Iran since the beginning for all the wars in Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan. And so they're just going to continue this concept repeatedly until they need more oil. The price of oil is going to go up and down, up and down, up and down until eventually a big dog comes down there and starts fighting back. And you have like a North Korea, South Korea situation where you might have PLA or Russians there. Chechens were already saying they're going to arrive to fight to help Iran because it's a holy war. Fascinating perspective that could evolve from this situation that essentially could have been settled through a contract or a discussion. But if it couldn't have, then we're just watching the natural course of what was going to happen anyway when a nation starts to advance itself toward nuclear warfare, that they're going to start to understand what sectors of the world they control. So when they get that nuclear power, they can pretend to respect them as they gain permission through these avenues. They'll enact their absolute strength in, since they can just wipe that entire dot map right there. Every single one of those dots can go to nothing with one nuclear blast, and that's a real war against capitalism because you're destroying their ships, you're destroying their profits, you're destroying every single one of their resources, which is why this shutdown is a representation of nuclear warfare. Not that they're going to do it, but once you have a nuclear weapon, then you have to respect them to a degree similar to North Korea and South Korea constantly fighting, shooting rockets at each other, but essentially they're trying to keep good relations so they can at least get some trade in the future. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like. More commentary to be seen from my channel. Thank you for watching.